Hi, this is John from Just Got Played Games, and last week I was on the Dice Tower 2023 cruise. For those of you who aren't familiar, every year Dice Tower hosts a cruise that does all the typical cruise-related activities. They go to different ports that are different each year. They have food that they make for you. You can eat anytime you want. They have pools you can hang out at, all kinds of things that you would associate with a typical cruise. But they also bring the same library that you use for Dice Tower East and Dice Tower West and set up a conference room at the bottom of the boat where you can go and check out games. They have a plethora of tables set up. You play the game, you check it back in, and you can just keep repeating that for the entire week. So you kind of choose your own adventure. How much cruising do you want to do? How many ports do you want to get off on? When do you want to have dinner? How many board games do you want to play? So it's essentially a cruise and a Dice Tower convention rolled into one, and it's the best of both worlds. There's always something to do, always something interesting going on, and I definitely heartily recommend them. So I just want to talk today a little bit about some of the games I played when I was on the cruise. So I have a list of 5 games that I've played that were not new to me, games that I played before, most games that I own. And there's 10 games that I was very excited to get to try, new to me or new release that came out in the last year. So let's just go ahead and jump in with the games that I have played before. The first on the list is Copenhagen. Copenhagen is a Tetris game, essentially. Every player has a board that's a grid of rows and columns. And Ticket to Ride style, you draft colors, and then you can discard those colors to get the tiles. You discard 4 blue to get the 4 blue tile, and you place it on your board. And when you cover up rows or columns, you get points for that. So the game either ends when the deck is run through twice, or when somebody gets to 12 points, and whenever that happens, whoever has the most points is the winner. So it's a very fun, Tetris-y little puzzle. It plays quickly, it's very easy to teach, and it's easy to get to the table. So if you enjoy Tetris, or just like the spatial puzzles of trying to get that, I would definitely recommend Copenhagen. Next on the list is Azul, Stained Glass of Sintra. I love the Azul series. There's 4 of them out. I think Stained Glass is the best of the 4. It's the second game in the series. It takes the abstractness of the first Azul and adds a little bit of structure to it, which I think goes really far in helping get new players acclimated to it. The conceit of this one is you're drafting tiles that match a certain color, and then you have to place them all on your board. You have columns that have random symbols on them, so you might have to put 3 orange, a yellow, and a blue. When you do, you flip that tile over, it scores, but then it also scores all the tiles to the right of it. Whenever you place tiles, you have to put your worker above that column, and you can never go backwards. So there's a lot more interplay between players in this one of when do I take tiles, when do I reset my worker, when do I score, and what do I score so that I can trigger more scoring as the game goes on. It's just a very neat little system. It definitely improves upon the original Azul in that respect. Still easy to teach and easy to get into, but very difficult to master. So definitely one of my favorite games, Azul, Stained Glass of Sintra. Next on the list is Ethnos. Ethnos is a very little known game from CMON that came out years ago, and essentially it's a area control game. You're placing markers on different areas that score increasing points over the course of 3 eras, and whoever has the most points wins. The way you do that is there are fantasy races in the game. You take 6 out of the 12 races, you shuffle them together to make a deck, and they each have their own special ability. You want to collect a certain kind, and it depends on your strategy of what you want to do, but say you're trying to collect 4 dwarfs. You finally get the 4th dwarf, you place it, that lets you put a marker out on the board based on the color of the leader that you played in that band, and then it gives you a special ability. So the special abilities all work differently together. Each session is going to play differently because it's 6 out of the 12 of the different races that you're playing with, and you just use that to do area control. So a fun little game. The only downside to Ethnos is that they never really added on to it. This game is dying to get another just set of 5 or 6 fantasy races with different abilities you can mix in, which would go so far in adding longevity to it and just make it more and more interesting to play. But even without any additional support beyond the original base game, it's still a great little game. And if you like area control, I would definitely recommend that you try out Ethnos. Next on my list is Res Arcana. Res Arcana is an interesting game in the fact that you start with a set of artifacts, you start with a mage power, and you're essentially deciding which artifacts to play when to generate a bunch of resources and use those resources to do different things, such as buying places of power or setting up future combos so that you can get more points or more resources. And it plays in a unique way. Everyone does one thing on their turn, then it passes. You're kind of trying to set up your own engine or combo system, trying to beat people to the places of power you want, and buy monuments. So it's a neat little game. It does have 2 expansions, which really change the experience and add on to it. Definitely just an interesting, unique game that I would recommend you give a try. Last on my list of games that I have played before is Libertalia. This is a special one because I have owned Libertalia for a long time, and it's a pirate game where essentially you have 30 different pirates in a deck, you randomly draw out 6 of those, and then you play them one at a time, secretly until everyone's ready, then you reveal them. You resolve their actions in power order, and from the day phase to the dusk phase, you gain the different loot tiles on the ship, and then whoever has the most points at the end of the game wins. So it's one of my favorite games that's essentially easy to teach, and there's not a ton going on mechanic-wise. But the gameplay comes from outthinking your opponents. I think they're going to play Granny Wata on this turn. I'm not going to play that one. Instead, I'm going to play my bosun to try to get rid of that character. Just a little different iteration like that where you're trying to outthink your opponent, figure out what they're going to do, what number they're going to go at, and try to play in a way that's going to get you the most loot, while also subverting what they're trying to do. So why it was surprising is because they recently released a update to Libertalia. Same game, same base, same theme, same experience, but what they did is they tweaked a lot. And what my initial impression was is I'm like, why would I bother with this? I already have Libertalia, I love it. Why would I bother getting a slight update? But I was very wrong. It is a slight update in the fact that nothing major has changed, but what they did is they tweaked some of the abilities from the 30 cards. They added 10 more cards. They changed the way the tiebreakers work. Just very simple things like that, but all of them come together to make it just much more interesting experience. A bunch of little changes in areas that I didn't realize needed changes, but when I saw what they did, I was like, that's a great change. So all of the changes that they did add up over time and just make it a very compelling experience. So much so that I have now bought the update of Libertalia despite the fact that I own the original, because I think it changed just enough to make it worth owning the new version of it. I didn't think the artwork was going to grow on me, but it did. I thought I would prefer the darker pirate theme, the more just like realistic looking, but the new characters, while they're a lot more cartoony, are still very, very compelling and interesting. And I just ended up loving the art style, loving the changes. And if you haven't played Libertalia, I highly recommend it. And if you've written off the update because you've played the original, I recommend giving it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So now let's go into the games that are new to me. I'm going to start with 10 and work my way up to 1. And they're going to kind of be increasing in my enjoyment as I go on up to number 1. So we'll start with number 10, Azul Summer Garden. And as I said earlier, I'm a huge fan of Azul. I love this series, but this one just fell flat for me. It puts that abstract back in the game, and unfortunately it does it in a very convoluted way. We learned the rules from the rule book. We just read through them as we sat down, and I did that for a lot of games. I'm actually do that every year, the different dice towers, the crews. And usually it's a fine experience. I do run into some that just learning from the rulebook is almost impossible because it's just not structured well. And I think that might have been the case with Summer Garden. Because as we were playing it, it just felt very tough to decipher and convoluted. Everything from, I'm drafting this tile, what does that mean? To, how do I place this tile on my board? To, how do the placement restrictions work? It has to be next to certain things, but it can't be next to other things. And for what's always been a very simple endeavor of you draft some tiles, you place them, and the gameplay comes very much from the puzzle of what tiles do I want and when, this one seemed to up that puzzle to the realm of just like, I have no idea what I want, and I don't know if this play is going to work. Is it possible that if somebody taught me the game, I'd have a different experience? Yes, it very much is possible, but from what I played, it fell flat for me, and with so many Azuls to choose from, this one was very disappointing to me, and it's the one I would rank the lowest by far. So if you're going to play Azul, I'd recommend Stained Glass of Sintra, and I would definitely recommend staying away from Summer Garden unless you want a much thinkier, heavier version of Azul. Number 9 on my list is Lockup. If you've ever played Role Player, this is in the Role Player universe, which role player is a great concept. You're creating a fantasy RPG character and trying to score the most points to win. They spun that off into an actual tabletop game where you can use role player to roll your character and then play in that setting. And I love what they're doing with the universe. They're taking this great theme, they're expanding it, they're doing a lot of different things with it. So I was very excited to play Lockup and see what they did with a worker placement style game. So the way it works is you have several tiles that represent your workers, your prisoners essentially, because you're all locked up in this fantasy jail and you're trying to collect resources to buy magical items and recruit some of the seedier elements of the city to get you points. So there's different locations that do different things. You place your workers out at them. 2 of the 6 can be face down, so it adds that little element of, I think they put high numbers here, but I'm not sure. And then during the course of the round, you generate suspicion. And the way suspicion works is if the suspicion pool runs out, the guards are going to kind of do a shakedown, and whoever has the most suspicion loses points. Whoever has the second most loses half of those points. And then they put some of their suspicion back. Great in concept, but one of the tiles that you can place out means that you don't have to take the suspicion from that location. And it's such an effective tool that throughout the course of the entire game, we only had one single shakedown, and it was like 2 cubes to 1 cube to 1 cube, and it didn't change the game at all. It didn't change any positions of the players and their points. It didn't feel impactful. At the end, it just kind of felt tacked on. And further, when you're placing your workers out, you have to choose a location and put all the workers you're going to put out there. It can be anywhere from 1 to all 6 of them. So if I put 2 workers out there, let's say I put my 2 most powerful workers because I really want it. Well, someone later in the turn can go and put out 3 most powerful workers because they really want it. And they get the benefit, and I'll probably still get something. And even if I get nothing, I can send them to the library to draw cards from an intrigue-style deck from Lords of Waterdeep. But it doesn't feel great to put out workers in an area that you really want and someone beats you, and you don't have it. You can't add to it after that. You can't change anything. And then you go and draw a card from the deck, and one of the things that you can do is go really hard to get the first player marker in a red cube. Well, that entry card I drew says, I take first player marker. So you spent your entire turn getting a red cube and a first player marker. Well, I say, I want first player, and then someone after me goes, you have too many red cubes for my taste. I'm going to remove one with this entry card. And your entire round is now wasted because everything you gained, everything you spent all of your workers to get, has now been taken from you from a take that random deck that you had no interaction with. So unfortunately, I love the world, but Lockup just fell very flat for me. A lot of interesting concepts and cool things going on, but none of it really gelled, and at the end of the day, it just didn't feel great. My number 8 is Meadow. If you have ever played Everdell, Meadow is a very similar game. You're playing out locations and fantasy creatures, and you're using those to combo into putting out other fantasy creatures and locations. When you are doing that, you simply look at the icons that you have, and if you have the right icons, you can take another card, and then you play it on top of one of the cards you have, which covers the icon, but it gives you an icon. So that's pretty much the entire game, and the area that they really could have landed on this is, we're going to give you that Everdell experience, but in half the time, because Everdell can be a little bit long for most people's taste, and it's also a little bit difficult to teach. So if Meadow had been aiming for that niche of a more easy to introduce and play Everdell, I think they really could have done something, but unfortunately, Meadow took just as long to play, and it was easier to teach, but I never felt like I had great turns. At the most, you're going to gain 4 points at the end of the game for a turn, and it's really just, I have this card worth 4 points, and I have the prerequisites, so I play it and I get the 4 points. There's never any build-up, there's never any payoff. It's really just a very flat game for me of play some cards, then play some other cards on top of it and gain slightly more points than last time, and then you just count up points and whoever has the most wins. So I don't think it really landed in an area that it could have been really great for, and I don't think it's very exciting to play. So unfortunately, in both of the spots where it could have shined, I just don't think it did. Up next is number 7, Wonderland's War. This is a really cool theme. Essentially what you're doing is you're playing Alice in Wonderland characters, and you're going around the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, collecting resources, you're empowering your leader, you're recruiting other creatures and characters from Alice in Wonderland, you're putting workers out into one of 5 areas, and then after everybody has gotten 4 cards, you go to those areas and you fight over them. And the way you do that is it's a bag builder. One of the resources you can get during the first part of the phase is to put new tiles in your bag, which are little circles that give you power and special abilities. But there's also negative ones that whenever you draw them, you have to kill off a worker. So it's kind of a push your luck bag building game where you're trying to fight, you're trying to gain power, and then once you run out of workers because you pulled those bad tiles out of the bag, you're out. Or you can bow out to complete a quest early, or you can keep fighting and win by getting to 25 first or being the last one standing. And when you win, you get an area control marker that makes you stronger in that location for the rest of the game, and points. It's a very cool concept. It's very interesting, and I really like what they did with the theme. They played through it really well and added a lot to the concept of it. So if you like skirmish games, if you like Alice in Wonderland, this is definitely a game that I'd recommend you check out. Coming in at number 6 is Planet Unknown. Planet Unknown is a tile placement game where you're putting tiles on a board and you gain the icon that you placed on the tile, which puts 1 of 5 tracks higher, which gives you different special abilities. So one of the things is a rover that puts a rover out on the board, and you can drive the rover around and run over asteroids and collect different things that give you points at the end of the game. There's a track that lets you draw extra cards from the top of the deck and gives you special abilities or point scoring cards for the end of the game. And it's just a really neat system, and what really propels it is there's a rondelle, a movable, like lazy Susan of tiles, and you can spin it towards you. You choose from one of the 2 on that section, and then everybody else chooses from one of the 2 that are on their section, and you place that out. So it's a really neat game that's not very difficult to get into. It's all about raising tracks on different things and trying to get as many points as you can, and it plays very well. So I would definitely recommend Planet Unknown. Number 5 is Shake That City, which is a game that hasn't released yet. Because Dice Tower gets preview copies, sometimes they have things that just haven't been out yet, and Shake That City is an example of that. You have a square box that you put a bunch of cubes into, and very similar to the pyramid from Camelot, you shake it up, you hit a button, and it puts out 9 cubes in a grid, and then the active player takes one of those cubes and removes it, and puts that exact configuration of cubes on their board. Everybody else chooses from what's left over one of that type and put on their board, and you replace it with tiles. There's 5 different tiles, like residential, factory, and you're just trying to get those tiles onto the board, and they score differently based on what's next to what. And it's a really cool system. It plays very quickly. It's a great family weight game that doesn't take that long, and I would heavily recommend checking that one out. In that same vein, number 4 is Caesar's Empire. You have to connect a road to Rome, because all roads lead to Rome. And when you do, you get a point marker of that city, and you get a resource. And you're just trying to collect resources, which you're going to score for set collection at the end of the game. You get the points on the back of the tile, the highest number of points for that size city or that color city. And it plays really quickly. All you're doing is you're putting out a worker to claim a road, and then you score every worker that's on the route back to Rome. And then you just keep doing that till all the cities are gone. You count up your points, and whoever has the most tiles win. A very fun game, very nice intro game, good gateway game. Definitely recommend it. Number 3 on the list is Orichalcum, however it's pronounced, I'm not sure. But this is an interesting one in the fact that you take a selection which is going to give you a special action, and it's going to give you a tile to place on your board. It has to be connected to something you've already built. If there's a volcano on it, you put a monster on it, and then you can earn the favor of 4 different gods, which are going to give you a victory point and a special ability. And it's just a race to 5 points. But the gods can be taken away from you if somebody plays another area that's 3 or more of that same type, like the desert is the yellow god. And you're just kind of trading those back and forth. You're using ore to buy point tiles. And once someone gets to 5, the game's over, and whoever has that 5 points wins. So it's a neat little game where you're matching up actions to tile placement, and then you have to kill all the monsters off to be able to win the game. Number 2 is Scout. Scout is a trick-taking game that's very similar to Rummy. You have a handful of cards, but you can't reorganize them. The numbers are stuck. And you're trying to make either sets of the same number or runs. Someone will lead a trick out. And then if you if you can beat that, you play your trick out, you take all the cards from their trick and score it, and then it goes to the next person. What's neat is if you can't beat it, what you do is you give them a victory point, you take a card from their run, which you can slot anywhere in your hand, and when you do that, it makes your hand stronger, and it makes their trick weaker, so the next person will have an easier chance to beat it. So it's a very good back and forth. There's some risk you can take and going, I could play a card, but I really want to build this up for next time. And it's very satisfying to get some cards out of the middle and then collapse the sides in to make another run that's much bigger and worth more points. And then whoever goes out first doesn't lose any points for what's in their hand. Everybody else loses 1 point for the cards left over. And you keep going like that, 1 round per the number of players, and whoever has the most points wins. So it's a very simple card game, great gateway game, and if you like games like Rummy or Spades or anything like that, this is just a natural progression of that. It plays just as well, and there's a lot of strategy to it that I enjoy. Number 1 on my list is Endless Winter. This is a sandbox game where you're essentially trying to survive in the Paleo era. You're going hunting and killing the animals you get for food or saving them for set collection. There's a track you can go up that makes your buried characters worth more points, or it gives you more points for your leftover resources. You can go out and fight over an area of tiles that give you different benefits. You can go out into this area control section that every round is going to give you stuff, so you want to be the one in charge of it. So there's just a bunch of different things you can do within this sandbox, and you're taking one action a turn, but that action kind of chains into a bunch of different things that you can do, and then you use that to generate resources and get points. It's just a fantastic game. Typically once a year I'll do this where I'm playing a game and about halfway through it I start looking on my phone to see if it's available for purchase. I'll buy it, and then I'm looking forward to it coming. And that was Endless Winter this year. Last year it was Guilds of Merchant Explorers. So this is a great sandbox game that and a lot of times in sandbox games, it's like, well, there's a lot of things you can do, but this one thing is the most important, it's the strongest. It doesn't feel like this in this. There's a lot of different ways you can play. There's things you can focus on. You want to do a little bit of everything, but you kind of want to focus on 1 or 2 things. And in this, all of the different things you can do feel equal. So it's really more about you making the most efficient turn that you can and getting the most you can out of a turn, but everything you do has the potential to win. So just want to talk a little bit about the cruise itself, games that I played, and the different experiences that I had. So if any of those games interest you that I was talking about, I would definitely recommend checking those out. If the cruise interests you, I would definitely look into that because it's such a fun time. And until next time, thanks for joining me. This is John from Just Got Played.